Okay, this one's now numbers 1 and 2 from the right triangle trig test, which I believe the title here was test 5-4 through 5-5. Those were the lessons in the textbook here. Now, we're going to remember to solve these triangles, or not to solve the triangle, but find a particular angle or a side, and these are for right triangles, is we can use our ratios. So let's look at this real quick before we look at the problem here. So remember our mnemonic here, we can say some old hippie, and then caught another hippie tripping on acid. You remember our ratios. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So we don't know those ratios real well. We can write this at the top of our paper to kind of help us out here. Now, let's use these ratios in these two triangles here to find the unknown thing. So number one, you had this angle and this side given, and you had to find this side h right here. So, at this point, we now know laws of sine, also laws of cosine, but it's really not necessary to use laws of sine or cosine if it's a right triangle. If it's a right triangle, I'm just going to use my ratios. So from my angle here, let's look how these two sides are related to the angle. The h would be adjacent, and the 27 is the hypotenuse. So if we're looking at hypotenuse and adjacent, or adjacent hypotenuse here, we're going to use cosine. So I say cosine of the angle, so cosine of 54 degrees equals, now adjacent over hypotenuse, so that would be h over 27. Okay, and now we can just cross multiply. So we'll get 27 times cosine of 54 degrees, and then h times 1 is h. Okay, and it's probably a good possibility here on your test that I'm going to use ACT type questions for these. And on the ACT, you're not assumed to have a calculator. And so on the ACT, a lot of times they just give these as choices as for what would h be. And so we say it would just be 27 times the cosine of 54, whatever that is. Now, we'll actually type it in and get it here, but what you're going to find is your test questions are going to be in this format here, where you're not really going to have to find the answer. You're just going to find, all right, what calculation would get me to the answer. Now let's push it in here. 27 times cosine of 54. Okay, so that's about, I believe it had to round to the 10th place, so it was about 15.9 there. Okay, on number 2, in this case, you have these two sides, so it's kind of similar to this one because you're dealing with the same two sides, but you had to find the angle instead. So since I'm finding the angle here, what I'm going to use is going to be the inverse of whatever function. Now let's look again. We've got adjacent and hypotenuse. So adjacent and hypotenuse again would be cosine. So the cosine of angle S equals, now cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, so 8 over 17. Okay, and here again, I may give it a question where it doesn't actually work it out. So the calculation that would work it out here is we would do, since we're finding an angle, we would do the inverse cosine of 8 over 17. So probably the way that correct answer choice is going to look on the 6 weeks test, similar to like an ACT test, is it would just look like this. Now, let's calculate it actually to see what the real answer is here. So inverse cosine of 8 over 17, okay, is about 61.9, and since that's an angle, we definitely need to write here that this would be in degrees.